But I thought it was appropriate in one way, because I am going to talk about at least an event in Minnesota, because it was weather postponement, and we have a lot of those in Minnesota, as you know. So what I am going to talk about is an event that became nationwide and worldwide, in the end became known as the Great American Smokeout. So I need to know how many people grew up in towns under 2,500. Okay, so there's a half a dozen people that will understand maybe the setting of all of this, because it happened in Monticello, Minnesota, small town, about 2,000 people, located about an hour outside of Minneapolis. So first, introduce you to my father. This is Lynn Smith. He was a smoker. He was born in 1920, started smoking in his late teens, went in the military in World War II, and of course what happened is our government got people addicted because they were given free cigarettes. After the war, still smoking, he chose to go into the weekly newspaper business, and was still a smoker when I was born and my brother Warren was born. But in 1954, there was a pivotal event in this country, and that was the first Surgeon General's warning about the health hazards of smoking. My dad read that closely and quit smoking. He often said he chickened out early. So after about 17 years of smoking, he quit. At the same time, he then, as many people who leave something, became a bit of a crusader for this whole, for the health hazards of smoking, but also a cleaner life, indoor smoke-free environments. And he would write in his weekly newspaper column, mostly annually, about the latest developments in all those efforts, and the latest health issues that were revealed about smoking. Roll that ahead to 1972. Next one, Jerry. And he wrote a full-page editorial called "The Tyranny of Smoking." It was accumulation of everything that he, at that point, knew about smoking and all of those issues. And it was widely reprinted, and he got tons of letters and acclaim for this editorial. Then he got to thinking, well, what do I do after that? He would often tell people, after you do a full page, what is there? What is there to do? And he came up on the idea independently to try to get the smokers in his town to quit smoking, and he set up the date for January 7th, 1974, 40 years ago this month. Now, some of you saw the movie Cold Turkey, so you know that Dick Van Dyke starred in a rather unmemorable movie with that type of thing. I'm not sure that there was any link in the two, but anyway, by the fall of 1973, my dad was full gear into what he called Monticello D-Day, or Monticello Don't Smoke Day. Next one, Jerry. Now, he, part of his military background, set up a sort of a military countdown beginning in the Monticello Times 4 weeks before the event. Now, the key to this was that if you were a smoker, you were asked, or hounded might be better, because smokers were found in such places as the church pews or the Rotary chairs, and asked to sign up and to pledge that I promise not to smoke on D-Day, January 1974. All almost 300 people said they would do that, pledged they would do that. And what happened is that this thing sort of, it became like a community event, and there was sort of a rally that happened. And every week, you could see the list would grow on the number of people that signed up, including the mayor, including the school superintendent, including a brother-in-law of mine, all kinds of teachers, people at the nuclear plant, and it was sort of like when they saw my dad coming, they would run. But you'd catch them in places there would be no exit. In the end, as I said, 291 people signed the pledge, and meanwhile there was posters, billboards around town that if people had a sign, they sort of said participate or don't smoke on January 7th, 1974. Next, Jerry. So this was a poster that was around town that said the D-Day objective was twofold: one, to get people to quit for their own sake, and two, there was the beginnings of the movement was beginning that you and I are entitled to clean air in a public place, at a governmental meeting, in a school, at a Rotary meeting. Now, for those of one of the things I noticed just last week in all the Kennedy coverage, did you notice how many reporters and broadcasters were smoking? And it seems that if you're younger, if you're in the next generation down from me, you would look at that and think, this is really unusual, because you don't see that today. If someone lit up a cigarette in this room, he or she would be chastised, or at least would seem to be really out of place. But it wasn't that way on January 7th, 1974 in Minnesota, or I dare say in Oregon. So if you think how far we've come. Next year. So, January 7th, 1974, a Monday. Well, what happened was that the media attention on this small town publisher trying to get his town to smoking was a great story. It was a great story about an individual speaking out. The timing was right because there was the start of the clean indoor air, and just sort of all kinds of things that would come after that, who could buy cigarettes, and so forth. Some of you will remember Dallas Townsend, who was CBS News radio, 7 o'clock in Minnesota, who ended his broadcast talking about the Monticello D-Day. Star Tribune, Minneapolis Morning Tribune at that time, sent out a reporter to cover it. The largest radio station in Minneapolis did a remote broadcast. Picture up on top is Dad and a real well-known radio personality, Charlie Boone. CBS News sent their crew out of Chicago, and then, of course, it became a life, and then Associated Press picked it up, and the phone rang continuously. For the first, the Rotary Club that we belong to, for the first time, had a smokeless meeting on January 7th. I think it was set up by Dad to, he knew enough about the media that Monday morning might be a good time to get publicity, but also Rotary met on Monday noon, so that hit maybe 15 Rotarians who had signed the pledge card. Well, they weren't going to do that. So it was almost like if people smoked on that day, there was almost like a guilt, or they were hiding in the shadows. And no, I'm not here to say that 291 people didn't smoke that signed that pledge card. We all know that's the case. But we also know of a 4-pack-a-day smoker who didn't smoke for the first time since he was a young person, this guy. So everyone knew who Eddie Schaefer was, so we just had the headline, Eddie Schaefer, Eddie made it, because he claimed that he didn't smoke on that day. And this is a really true situation. The media was the message for Monticello D-Day. The media carried this far beyond what the Monticello Times could have ever carried it. I mean, it was huge, and the phone rang forever, and it was quite an event, singular event in the life of both my father and the Monticello Times. Thanks, Jerry. So this was it might have been a slow lead day, because this was the lead story, the banner headline, page 1 in the Minneapolis Tribune the next morning. For most, it was too tough to puff in Monticello. So they, here it says the town was 1,700. They sent a reporter, and he went all over, but he also went into the bars, and to be sure, there were people that scoffed at this, who said that my father really didn't care so much about health of people, but rather, that he was looking for his own fame, and I mean, he would hear that for many years later. And so the Star Tribune carried this front page, and then the life continued. Next year. My father also had, of course, people thought that when they saw his license plate, of course, they thought he must have been involved in Normandy, which was slightly the case, although way in the back lines he was. But he had his own license plate. So what happened after Monticello D-Day? 100 days later, those 291 people were surveyed to see how many people quit smoking. Did this work? Was it effective? 10% had. So somewhere around 28 people had quit smoking for good because of Monticello D-Day. Those were impressive numbers. Some really caught the eye of people like the Lung Association and the American Cancer Society. And George knows about this because he actually, if I'm correct, helped promote the Smokeout in some of his days, later days of directing the Lung Association here. It was so successful that excuse me, the decision was made to carry D-Day to Minnesota D-Day in the fall of '74, 9 months later. Of course, Dad was the honorary chairman, and he went around the state and was all over the media again. And so Minnesota D-Days statewide were held both in 74 and 75. Next came California in 76, and then the American Cancer Society recoined it not as Don't Smoke Day, but as the Great American Smokeout in the fall of 77. Go ahead, Jerry. And then came also a worldwide audience, and there were no smoking days in Britain. And then ultimately, the World Health Organization has, and I'm not sure if they still do today, has the what they call the World Non-Tobacco Day. You don't know if that's still going, do you, George, or not? Maybe you didn't know there was. That one didn't carry on in the States as much because you had the greatest American Smokeout. Still held today, third Thursday of November, so the Thursday before before Thanksgiving. Okay. Well, there was a ton of this whole movement carried my father to meet incredibly interesting people, including some people you wouldn't know in Minnesota, but the Minnesota Viking, Bob Lurtsema, this is Tom Bernansky, a World Series hero for the Twins, Natalie Cole, who was later a chairman, and one of the most famous, Dad got a lot of mileage out of this, but Cal Welch. All these things came in, because they were also involved in supporting the Smokeout. Jerry? He also got lots of very interesting letters, including from Perpich, the governor, and Mondale, who at that time was state senator, and a great one from Jerry Ford, who was vice president at the time. I have to read you this paragraph. So this was a letter to my father from Gerald Ford. I must confess that as a pipe smoker, thank you, George, you're aiding my lungs here, is what you're doing. I must confess that as a pipe smoker of more years than I can care to count, I find it extremely difficult to put my pipe aside for any lengthy period. So I can appreciate the problems of longtime smokers experience in trying to stop. Your D-Day campaign may provide a little extra incentive for a no-smoking pledge. So there was lots of letters and publicity. Dear Abby, Charles Schultz in Minnesota wrote Peanuts. And there was all kinds of stories throughout the nation. This one in Minnesota, Jerry, the next one. This one in Tucson, Arizona. And we can go. And then there were then all kinds of anniversaries. So USA Today, Dear Abby, Star Tribune again. This would have been on the 10-year anniversary of D-Day. It all culminated, really culminated in the fact that people quit smoking. And for every one of those people that said this was a publicity stunt, which just added to my father's ego, there was 10, if not 25 people that stopped him on the street, no matter where he went. If they found out that he was the originator of the Great American Smokeout, stopped him on the street and thanked him. This happened many times in his life, where they thanked him because he was the one that got them to quit smoking. They would tell their stories, as some of you do here, about how your life improved, and health, and cost, and so forth. Next, Jerry. Oh, okay, so when I started to say that, where did this all culminate? Well, it all led to my dad getting the highest award, highest citizen award for from the American Cancer Society for his efforts. Most of the Cancer Society awards and their national go to researchers and people that have found cures for different types of cancer. So this was a pretty illustrious company in the Waldorf Astoria banquet room for my father and mother, when he was given this award. It's the first time in his life he had worn a tux, because he'd never had a need in small town Minnesota. He was married in his brother's suit in '46. So this was the pinnacle for him personally. And then I just pointed this out, that I talked about the fact that the world now has, at least in 1989, had a no tobacco day. Okay. Whoops. So, does it go on? Yes, it does. It still goes on. 10 days ago, almost 2 weeks ago, the Great American Smokeout was again observed across this country. I just go online every year and plug in his name and the Smokeout and come up with stories across this country on various observances or campaigns on the local level. In this case, we lost that one, but it really doesn't matter. In this case, on the East Coast. So we're coming up to the 40th anniversary of the Smokeout, and somewhat like the military countdown originally, the Monticello Times of today is doing a series of stories that broke this week, and this one, this is a guess you'd say, a lead story of 40 years, Great American Smokeout hits its hallmark. So it'll be back in the news in big time. I'd be remiss if I didn't say, at least mention my mother, because when my father went on his, he was full tilt. He was 100% consumed by things. At one point it was golf, another point it was foreign cars, and then this one came, and he never got rid of it. So my mother was tireless in hearing about this and traveled, well, a lot through Minnesota, but also around the country to things, sounding board, and she has plenty of stories to tell in a very modest way. So just to finish the story with an obituary, my dad died in 2005, so about 8 years ago. My mom's still living in Minnesota. She gets some of the interviews now, although she would prefer not to. Let me close by this was written about the event and how unusual it was for a weekly newspaper editor. You know, for those of you that grew up in small towns and read weekly newspapers, you know there's a certain amount of ridicule or people dismiss them as never having an impact. We print the news that everyone already knew, but people read it anyway just to see if you got it right. I mean, I've heard all of these. I've heard all of these in my life, and a lot of people joke that those weeklies are filled with local news on who visited who. You know what I'm talking about if you grew up in a small town. When I have talked about this to college students many times, I talk about the fact that no matter the size of your newspaper, the reach of your audience, or how many readers you have, you could still have impact. And a fellow newspaper publisher in South Dakota said it best, and then I'll read this. Is from Bob Carroll-Levitt's South Dakotan. I quote, "It is doubtful that any other weekly editor in the country ever had as much of an impact on so many people across the nation and in other parts of the world as Lynn has had. What he did, without realizing at the time, was to become the originator of the annual No Smoking Day, which affects millions of Americans each year. And in the process, he's won the title of public enemy #1 of the tobacco industry. And there's no telling how many lives he might have saved along the way." Thank you. Harvey.
Yes, I didn't realize that I had your father to thank. That I quit smoking in the second second smokeout in California.
He would, I wish he was alive to hear that story, but this was not a setup, everybody, but that is exactly the type of testimony he heard. So I can tell you when you quit then, if the second California would have been about 77.
Yeah.
Jerry.
So was he a smoker up to D-Day?
No, he quit. He quit in '54 at the first Surgeon General's warning. So he had quit 20. He had been a non-smoker for 20 years. Don.
Your dad was a great hero, obviously. I wish he had been able to get a hold of my dad. He started in World War I, and by the time I knew him as a kid, he was up to 4 packs a day. And I never had a man-to-man conversation with him because he died of lung cancer when I was 19 years old. And it's a terrible thing, the smoking business.
Thank you. Lowell.
Yeah, my mother smoked for 68 years. She could never quit. But the nice thing was her 5 kids hated it so much they never smoked.
Tell me how many reformed smokers we have here.
Yeah, if you don't mind, how many reformed or quit smokers? About. Luke.
What was it like for you to follow in his footsteps, and how has he influenced you personally in your career?
I often tell people I'll never have as big, well, I'm retired now, so for those who don't know, I followed my dad and mom, Nancy and I did as owners of the paper, and I was actually there, born into weekly newspapers and was there 34 years. Well, it's pretty clear that I'm in the, tens of thousands of us who toiled in the weekly newspaper business that never had anything like that, and never will. So I never felt, though, a shadow, Lou, but it's a fair question. What did I learn from that? Well, I think I learned how much influence, if people were willing to step out, even in a weekly, I hate to say that, even in a weekly, I'll just say a weekly newspaper can have if you properly use your influence. And so I learned that about that, the role of the editorial, the role of opinion, and also the courage to take a stand. A lot of those people that signed up to not smoke were very good friends of his, probably detested him during that month period and hated him on the day of D-Day. And it would have been, I think it took a fair amount of courage to do it. So. Okay, I got to get to the doctor here. Ted.
One of the doctors. In 1974, I was 48 years old, at the peak of my career as an academic, as a urological surgeon, when we actually got into knowing how important smoking had to do with etiology of bladder cancer and all sorts of other cancers. And I remember, I was there, Edward R. Murrow, he died of cancer, ad hominem argument, Mickey Mann, all these people did these things. And I even remember the time when you saw things in the newspaper, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarettes. So all these people promoted that, to the addiction of this terrible stuff, carcinogens. And now I walk down the street and I see young people smoking, people in high school, people, counted how many people, young people are smoking, old people, under the bridges, they're all smoking. And so it's sort of a disappointing and frustrating thing to do. But I think you have to continue to carry the message, not to be judgmental, but to show people that what can happen. This is going on now, but it's a losing battle.
I don't think my father was judgmental because he had been addicted to nicotine himself, so he knew it. But he never quit trying to influence people. He had a debilitating stroke at age 78. He lived 7 more years in a nursing home. But any nursing home employee that he knew smoked, he was still trying to influence them. When the smokeout came around every year, he would try to get those to quit. Tara.
Did you personally have any pushback from the tobacco companies? Like, did they kind of go after him? Like, what was that response from the tobacco companies?
That would be a whole other 20 minutes. But he loved to have give and take with the Tobacco Institute and other people. So whenever he'd write something like The Tyranny of Smoking, he'd send it to certain tobacco people, hoping to get responses that he could print in letters to the editor, which would, they would show their arguments about we live in America, this is free enterprise, we're freedom, you can't tell me what to do. So there was a lot of that, and as Carol Evans said, my dad was probably public enemy #1 to the tobacco industry, and they probably dismissed him for a long time because he's just a little weekly publisher with about 3,000, 4,000 readers. But they knew who he was. But, I mean, they carry on with all their arguments. And so, one more. George.
Well, we get personal.
your dad had fascinations with many things, golf and cars and so forth. When this came along as a young man, how old you would have been?
I was 26.
Yeah. That here goes Dad again. Was that how did you first respond to this before you now, of course, quite proud of him and all that? But in the beginning, was it like, what the heck is this?
Well, I think I was skeptical at first when he sort of launched the idea, I would say in the fall of '73, and said that he had this idea, and I suppose there was a little bit of a here he goes again. And I knew that a lot of that would fall on me to write about it, and then to be his number 2 sounding board after my mom. And I'm not sure at what point I turned on that and realized this is huge and it's going to change people's lives. But I suppose, I mean, sometimes it was a little embarrassing because I'll go back to, my father would sit in December of '73, he'd sit in the back of the church, and I would have been there too, and he would pinhole these people. And I thought, you know, this doesn't seem very appropriate to me. But you know, now, you know, in retrospect, you see what happened. Whatever skepticism I might have had was totally ill-founded and shouldn't have been that way. So thanks for listening. Thanks again. Thanks, Jeff, Jerry, Curtis, for pulling my pictures together. I was going to do this in 5 minutes for Rotarian of the Day on the 40th anniversary of January 7th, but I got the word from Ivy's daughter at 5:30 this morning and jumped ahead. So thanks again, Mark.